Well, thank you for all being here, and for those online, I'm waving to you all. Waving to you all. Now, when you say that the food starts at 4:30 and the talk starts at 5, we all get screwed up and don't know when to be here. So we're going to go ahead and get started right in the middle. Now, this is our annual Budig Teaching Awards for special education. It's the Budig Awards are the highest teaching awards that we have in the school, and probably amongst the most prominent awards that the university offers. Gene Budig was the chancellor of the university for many years, and he decided that there were two exemplary programs that needed to have funding to drive, to recognize the work, the teaching work that we did. And so he created two awards in education, one in special education and one for education in general. And he created an award in the School of Journalism as well. And then years later, he decided he needed to do more. So he created a writing award in education journalism that we share. So every other year we give that award. So this is a great time for us each year where we get to have our awardee give a presentation. Jamie said to me, he went back and studied all of the former Budig presentations, and everybody talked about their past. So he's going to give us the history of Jamie Basham. It's not a terribly exciting history, everyone. No, I'm just teasing. Jamie, and I want to say that you are the first that I can say with all honesty that we had people from around the globe fly in here just to be here for this. Kate, if you would raise, Kate Reynolds is here to visit a colleague in the Department of Psychology, and met with some of our faculty and read about this and said, can I come to this? And I said, I think we still have room. And so Kate is, I don't know your exact title, but the director of the Learning Intervention division at the University of Melbourne, a university that we're hoping to do a number of partnerships with. And we're really glad that you're here. So Jamie has been at KU in the Department of Special Education since 2011. After 5 years of serving as an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati, did his doctoral work in psychology and special education at the University of Illinois. We have a number of Illini faculty here at KU. His work focuses on developing future-ready learning environments that are equitable and beneficial and meaningful for all learners. His research over the years has focused on a lot on universal design for learning. You know, Jamie has quite a history in that area. A lot recently, of course, on AI, but AI has been around a long time, as we're going to hear, I'm sure, in the talk. Focuses on STEM education, learner-centered design, innovation, and technology in human learning. Most recently, Jamie is involved with CIDL. It is the Center for Innovation, Design, and Digital Learning that's a federally funded research and technical assistant project that focuses on improving the capacity for faculty in higher education to use educational technology in special education and other fields. And the recent report you all put together, is that online now?
It'll be online. Yeah, we're going to today.
It's worth everybody taking a look at. I will tell you that this is a teaching award that every year Jamie would teach the undergraduate special education course for the students in teacher preparation, and with a strong focus on UDL. And as a part of the course, he had them put together kind of a poster session that we did down here. I guess it stopped with COVID. But that was a highlight every year for a lot of us engaged in the work, to get to see the work that students were doing. And I'll say this, that if that is any indication, the work that Jamie was doing with our students is really quite spectacular. So let me introduce Jamie Basham to you, our 2024 Special Education Budig Teaching Award awardee.
So I hope the mic's on and people can hear me online. I think we have it set up so that you can. So if you can't hear me, let us know, or you should let me know if you can hear me. So I do wear ties occasionally. It's not very often. And so I showed up to the office today and people were like, who's that guy in a tie? Today, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the future of learning and thinking about it from a sense of design. And that sense of design is important because I think as we encounter, as Rick already brought up, some of the things that are going on with AI, design is going to be critically important as we move forward. And so we start off with a really basic sort of question. What is design? What is design? And it's not something that we often think about in education. We talk about lesson plans. Occasionally we talk about lesson plan design, but overall, we don't train future educators, and especially future researchers, necessarily as designers. So I often want to start off with like a basic sort of understanding so that we can all kind of come around a topic. And so when we think about what design is, it's pretty simple, right? It's just the plan or drawing or the way that we produce and make something look and function in society. And we can look at buildings, we can look at processes, we can look at any number of things. But an important part about design that most people overlook is that this process of planning also embeds with it intent. And so by looking at the intent of a design, we can also think about what it means and how to approach it and how to use it. And so we can learn a lot about design. So here's a park bench. It's actually it's a bus bench. What can we learn about this design? What do you see there? Is it a normal bench? Not, I'm getting a head shake. No. There's little bumpers. What are those little bumpers for? So that everyone sits where they're supposed to sit? Yeah, so we can avoid people sleeping on the bench because this bench is in a covered area. It'd be an ideal area to sleep. It's also avoid skateboarders from jumping on the bench, right? And so we can think about the intent of the design by looking at it. So from a very sort of pragmatist sort of stance towards learning about design, we could just look at it and say, here's some of the intent. So here's some other things. Rubik's Cube. We have two types of Rubik's Cube. And oftentimes, when we start off class, we start talking about design in preparing future teachers. I use this very slide. And we usually have conversations about, well, which is the best Rubik's Cube for someone who might have a visual deficit or who might be blind? And what do you think most people say? The one with Braille. The one with Braille is what most people say, right? The one with Braille. And what most people don't understand about that is that very few people even know Braille, right? Very few people even know Braille. And second of all, it has the intent of excluding other people. And so that if we design with a more universal lens and we embed color and raise shapes, it says something about our intent. We want it to be a more inclusive sort of tool that multiple people can use. And so design is critical in the way we think about how we do things. It's critical about learning and the way we design for learning. Now, I was giving a talk a few months ago to a few hundred people, and I use this slide quite a bit. And I said, does anyone know what this is? And I've been using this slide for probably about 10 years with lots and lots of audiences. And a hand in the back of the room said, I think I do know what it is. But they had taken a picture of it and they fed it through an AI and asked what it was. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but if someone has a camera. But this says a lot about design, right? I was telling some doc students earlier this week in a class that I took my statistics class. And if you've gone to the University of Illinois, you may remember one of the rooms that had all these movable chalkboards. And I took a statistics class, and I'm not going to name the person here out loud, but had a wonderful professor, would write as much as he could, as quick as he could, flip up the board and keep going. And we were doing everything we could to take notes and try and figure out what he was saying. The other type of thing is we just think about little pieces of our design, right? And so here we have a lecture hall, probably like an art history is what I imagine this lecture hall to be. And we have this professor. Well, look at this on page 56. This is a representation of, right? We see this sort of thing all the time. We see this sort of thing all the time. And we don't even need to show that human interaction because all this design has intent. Let's think about this design. For people not in the room on Zoom, we're looking at an image of the room. What is the intent? What does this say about learning? It says, first of all, learning is kind of passive. We're not going to be very active in this sort of setting. I've taught in this classroom a number of times. It's really hard to teach. It also says, if you inspect it a little bit more, there's no power. There's no power. There used to be power. Now there's no power, right? So digital devices are not welcome unless they're fully charged. It also says, as a person who's gained a little weight over age, that maybe you're not welcome either. Because I have a tough time sometimes sitting in these chairs. In fact, I usually go to the back and sit in a chair on my own. There's lots of things that we can learn from design. There's lots of things that we can learn from design. And it says the intent of what is the organization or the institution, and what does that mean, and how they think about what learning looks like, and what they want it to look like. So, and we could argue about the statistic. I've done it multiple times over. But if you look into design research, Thackeray has said that 80% of the environmental impact, 80% of the environmental impact of the products and services and infrastructure around us is decided not during the implementation stage, but during the design stage. Think about that. What does it mean for education if we can kind of get into the amount of variance that might actually be predicted during the design stage? I mean, we could look at the physical infrastructure like this room and what it says about the types of interactions we might have. We might look at how we're doing this in a classroom, who might be included or not included based on that. But it's the design stage that matters. And I would argue that as we prepare future educators, we don't spend enough time thinking about design. We think a lot about the implementation side. We think a lot about practicing this practice. We don't think about thinking about the design to be inclusive, to think about the design for all learners from the very beginning. So as Rick was saying, the traditions of the Budig talk, right? So I've attended a number of these talks. I think every year since I've been here, I've attended 2, or I've tried to attend 2. And the traditions start off with there's pictures of kids, in a classroom or being younger. So I thought I would start off with a picture of myself. So I was in first grade. The first time I was in first grade. They were my hardest 2 years. So in first grade, about 3/4 of the way through the year, my parents came home and said, "You're disabled." They said, "You're disabled, and you need to go see this teacher in another room, and you're going to do first grade again." So first grade, the first time, was the hardest of the 2 years, right? He was joking. He's now sad he's joking about it. So I was disabled in first grade. I was identified to have a learning disability. They talked a lot about different learning disabilities, and through the years, it's ebbed and flowed, whether it's dyslexia or just a specific learning disability. But the amazing part about being disabled in first grade, and that I got pulled out and I walked on beams because they somehow thought if my balance was better, I'd be able to read. Right? The amazing part about that is that at the end of my third grade year, my parents were divorced and we decided to move to Florida. So by the end of my fourth grade year, I was no longer disabled. I was only below average. Right? I was only below average. And I kind of remained below average the rest of my K-12 career. I remained below average. I struggled to get C's. I cheated to get B's and A's occasionally, unless it was shop. I was pretty good in shop. Art, photography, gym. And we moved around a lot as kids. Every 2 or 3 years, we'd move to a new place. So I was a below average kid on free and reduced lunch. And I was in a school in Florida where I was a minority. So all the other kids were like me, except they were not like me. But we were all friends and we all hung out. And many of us were below average. Many of us were below average. But that was okay. Because we were in an area that was served by a nuclear power plant. So we had all this sort of innovative things coming into play. We had all this technology, all these different sort of things that they were trying to do with us. So while I couldn't still read, and for a while they were pulling me out to learn how to read. Of course, I couldn't read, so they pulled me out of math, social studies, and science to learn how to read. And that went on a little bit of time. And then they decided, well, we should probably figure out how to teach them math at the same time, right? And then suddenly I was just below average, and so I didn't have to go anywhere any longer. I just stayed in my own room. So, by the time I became a senior, I thought it was time to change. I was like one of those people that got along with everyone in school. I got along with everyone in school. I was in sports, and I was in the arts, and I did all this stuff, but I thought it was time to change. I was actually being offered scholarships to be an athlete. You can see it worked out well for me. But I didn't take any of those scholarships. And the highest score I ever got in the ACT was a 13. Because in my family, as a first generation person myself, the situation was go in and take the test. If you're not smart enough to pass the test, you shouldn't have to go to college. We shouldn't have to pay extra money for you to take a prep class, right? So I got a 13, started a junior college, and worked my way through. But I had a vision, right? I had a vision, and the vision was simple. I wanted to change the system so that other kids weren't in first grade the first time, or the second time, or the third time, identified suddenly with a disability, told they were disabled, watch your parents kind of leave your parents. And I wanted to change the system so we can make it better for all kids from the very beginning. And I also wanted to make sure that every student can be served at the same time. So where do you start? Well, you start with what you know. And then as I've done my entire career, you continually question that. Because I think good designers continually question. They continually think about how to improve. And I think that's what we should always be doing. So I started off and I went to Eastern Illinois University to a fine program. And my first job was providing support and assistance and education for a gunshot victim that was a quadriplegic. And in a nursing home. And as soon as I got in there, what I realized was, first of all, here's a 17, 18-year-old guy. He was on a trach with a ventilator, fully cognitively aware of what's kind of going on around him, has no social interaction, no way to really communicate. And I was the person they assigned to help him to get a GED so he can go off to college. So I went and I said, there's something in my training that should have prepared me for this. And I couldn't really recall much. But being a designer, I went through and I looked it up. I wanted to engage. And so early days of the internet, pre-visual browsers, right? Went to the library and came across assistive technology. And I thought, if I call a few people, I can figure this out. And so we called a few people. I called a few people. We all engaged around meetings and we designed systems to help this young man out. One of the systems we designed, and I thought this was critical, was a sip and puff gameplay system, like the one you see on the screen right now. It was a way for him to be able to play games and socialize. And suddenly his family and friends would come engage with him again. He would have a social outlet. And so I learned from designing and solving problems with one individual. I thought, well, that has to scale, right? And so when we moved to a new place and they had outdated curricular materials and books, I said, let's rip up those books. That didn't go over well by the principal, by the way. But let's rip up those books and let's do something new. So in 1996, in the fall of 1996, we jumped on a thing called Netscape because they had tech prep money in this rural school district I was working in. And we taught science and social studies using the web. It was novel, right? It was novel. I just thought I was problem solving. All the teachers in the building are like, you can't do this. And I'm like, but we are, right? So let's use the internet and let's use the web to educate. And I remember the way this worked. My schedule was such. I started off the day in biology as a co-teacher. I went to real world mathematics the next hour as a co-teacher. Now, real world mathematics was the mathematics class for the kids that didn't do well in algebra in 8th grade, primarily because they had learning difficulties. But real world mathematics relied all on word problems. So we had to redesign that class as well, but that's another story for another day. But so I went to algebra and then I had a break. And then in the afternoon, I had all these self-contained sort of these kids that were coming to my class. And so we taught science on this because quite literally the science book that was made for special education, that was in the closet, I'm saying all the words for my family, said that we're going to be landing on the moon in the next few years. Now, for those who don't understand that timeline, yeah, it's disturbing, right? It was the mid-90s. We had previously landed on the moon, almost 30 years prior. So we taught on the web. And then I was inspired. I came across some books at the bookstore. When you used to go to the bookstore, I would always hang out in the science section. You know, that section everyone kind of loves and hangs out. Yep. I came across 2 books by Seymour Papert. Seymour Papert. Now, anyone knows about Seymour Papert? He was a cognitive scientist at MIT. He's famous in the technology world for inventing logo. And he focused on cognition. Now, here I am, a special education teacher. not knowing that we're not supposed to focus on cognition, but behavior. That was supposed to be a joke. No one laughed, especially this section of the room. But Seymour Papert inspired me. He said that computers should be designed and we should use computers to inspire kids to engage. And for us to redefine our classrooms around kids using computers to build things. And we need to radically transform the education system using computers. We need to create the next generation of citizens using computers. We need lots of creativity. And so I went around reading his books and using his inspirational messages for a long time. And then I went to the University of Illinois to get my doctorate. Kind of speeding along here. And I came across this thing called Universal Design for Learning. It was the late 90s. Universal Design for Learning had just come into play. I saw it in a newsletter for the first time the spring of almost my freshman year, my first year of graduate school. And what inspired me about it was it dealt with designing environments that were accessible for all learners. Proactively thinking about how do we design digital environments. Again, focusing on cognition and the brain, but accepting that behavior was part of the package. And so let's design it around everything. And it started off real simple. Many people have heard about UDL, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it started off quite simply. Provide multiple means of engagement, provide multiple means of representation, provide multiple means of action and expression. And here I thought, all this time I've been doing this in a classroom and I've been kind of doing these things. And it's kind of worked well. So I'm going to study this. So I went to my advisor, who I love dearly, and said, here's what I want to study. And he kind of laughed at me. He said, that's a little too far advanced for what we're thinking about here. We focus a lot on behavior, but if you want to go and study this kind of stuff with cognition and everything, you should go talk to people in ed psych. In fact, you're taking a lot of classes over there. We could do some joint thing. And so I kind of created a program. And I technically graduated in educational psychology, but I worked with the same advisors, both in ed psych and special ed throughout the entire time. In fact, my advisor's advisor in ed psych was Seymour Papert. So it kind of comes around, right? All right, so UDL kind of came into play. We're going to study UDL, pick it up, and work on UDL. And UDL kind of progressed because UDL deals with both the learning environment, learning experiences, and how we design those two together to actually design for all learners. How do we design the environment to be accessible and support all learners? And how do we design the experiences themselves to be accessible and support learning for all learners? And then, lo and behold, midway through a large project I was working on with UDL, which I'm about to show in just a few minutes, these things called the UDL guidelines came out, which provided some more guidance than just these three principles. And the UDL guidelines, without going into a lot of detail, you can download them and read them on your own. But essentially what it's trying to get to is sort of what are the underpinnings of learning? I often talk about it like the physics of learning. Like, what are the principles that guide the interactions that take place in a learning environment? And that's what it's trying to get to. Now, the guidelines are not perfect. In fact, they're going under a large revision right now, which is causing a huge uproar among the UDL community. And they've always needed to be updated from the beginning. If you're a measurement person, you can see various issues with it. For instance, self-regulation and executive functioning should be kind of near one another. In fact, self-regulation should be under executive functioning, but that's a whole nother issue. There's lots of little issues with it and they need to be continually improved. In fact, there's lots of issues with UDL. Lots of questions, and I'm looking at Sean right there. He's like, oh my gosh, because Sean's also works in this area. So is Lisa and some others in the room. There's lots of questions around UDL. One of the questions we always get is it really scientific or evidence-based? Well, to a certain extent it is, because it has evidence-based and scientific sort of variables associated with it. So the question I always ask is the Golden Gate Bridge designed to be is it scientifically based? Well, that's a silly question. Well, essentially that's what we're looking at. We're trying to measure design. When you're trying to measure UDL, you're trying to measure design. So there are lots of issues with it that emerge, right? Including, how is it measured? How is it measured? And these are some of the things I've struggled with. So let me just take you on a quick walk through this world. So my first project, I had a phenomenal dean, not as good as Rick, not as good as Rick, but Larry Johnson came to me the first year at Cincinnati and said, I've got a project for you this summer. And I said, great. He goes, you're going to accept it if you want to work here. I was like, great, I'm going to accept it. So can you go in? We got funding to go in and do a school reform project. It was the first school under No Child Left Behind that was called for a school redesign. If you recall that law said after so many years, all the teachers have to be fired. We have to go through and redesign the curriculum of the entire school, rehire some teachers, re-engage all the kids. And so we had funding to do this work. And so in June, the teachers were going to all be let go and we'd rehire a bunch of teachers. And in August, the doors were opening of the new school. And my role was to co-lead this great team that was doing this work. And what were we doing? We were developing a UDL-based STEM school. Right? And so we went through the whole process. We could talk a lot about it, but we redesigned it. And we simply used this process. This was literally out of the slides that I've pulled up from the past and some papers I've written. And we used a process of iterative design with the teachers, except we had multiples of these things going on. We had one for the school, and then we had lots of little ones for the team. And then we did iterative lesson planning and iterative lesson design. And we used this throughout the school year continually on a continual sort of basis. And here are the quick snapshot of results. We were successful. We were successful. In fact, one of the funniest phone calls I ever had was with the parent information center of the school district we were working in. And they called, it was probably October, November, the first year we were working in the school. And the school had lots of choice schools that you could send kids to. So there's highly competitive to send your kids to certain schools. And the parent information center said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? They said, we have kids that want to transfer from one of our choice schools to come to your school that you're working in. And I said, what's the problem? They said, it's the worst school in the state. And it was, except it had been transformed. We were working on transforming it. So within the first year, we met AYP and we continued afterwards. I've got lots of data. If people want to talk about that another time, we can do that. But it introduced lots of issues, such as how do we measure this, right? Like you had your external evaluator come in from the state and say, man, this is a great place to send kids. I would love to send my kids here. But you talk about this thing called UDL. What is that? How do I measure that? I'm the external evaluator. I have no idea how to measure that. So it started off with a big question that still continues to this day. How do we effectively measure UDL? And not only how do we do it in a physical space where it's actually being implemented, how do we do it in digital learning systems? How do we do it in personalized environments? And this is something I've been working on, Sean's been working on, many other people have been working on around the country. How do we measure UDL? Introduces a huge, huge area. Well, we obviously needed more implementation and more research to make this happen. And so why don't we start a nonprofit? So I started a nonprofit, right? I started a nonprofit, the UDL Implementation and Research Network, had multiple people around me, had everything on my credit card. Laura was loving it. Went from having no money to within years having a multi-million-dollar budget that we're trying to run. And we merged with CAST, the founders of UDL, in 2019. As part of that, they said, can we buy some of your time from KU? So from 2019 to just this year, I spent time with CAST, about half my time. But during the nonprofit, when we're running this, we grew networks across the globe that were doing this work. Australia has a huge network. Australia has a huge network. Folks in Singapore, folks in China, everywhere throughout the EU. We had a number of folks doing this work and people volunteering to do various things around implementation and research in UDL. There's the first website behind it. I had to go back in the Wayback Machine and look up the first website. And there's the current website. And we started a number of projects, such as the micro-credentialing project, which has sold tens of thousands, I guess, of micro-credentials around the globe to people that are wanting to learn UDL. Various states have bought them for every teacher they have in the state. We have the UDL reporting criteria, research reporting criteria that Sean and others worked on how to report UDL and research. We have the UDL school implementation certification criteria, which gets into how do we certify and go through that process. And we actually go into the process of product certification now. So as an example, here's some of the events that we used to host. People in the room have been to those events. And then here's an example of what's going on in the UDL implementation certification criteria. So this works in helping schools think about what does UDL look like at a holistic level. Like the things that we were doing in 2007, 2008, et cetera, at a school level, how do we apply that? How do we recognize the variability? Just like we have variability in our learners, we have variability in schools. So how do we use implementation science and yet have a common vision around a big framework? And so we created 4 domain areas. Each domain has 4 elements. And schools can then go through and kind of use data to figure out where their levels are and then establish annual goals to move themselves forward. And we have lots of tools around that. But the UDL IRN brought a lot of other people around. And UDL was about design. And so you're going to get lots of people thinking about what else can we design? Well, what about video games? What about video games? So we designed video games. This won STEM Game of the Year, I think in 2010. Is a video game that we made with Filament Games, had federal funding. We did a randomized control trial across the country. We presented this to a bunch of colleagues in the sciences. And I remember one raised their hand in this big mix of people in the sciences, and they said, you can't use this game any longer with middle school kids. And we said, why? And we thought they were kind of joking, right? Because it's the same content I teach my freshmen in college. And it's a lot more engaging this way. If they know that coming in, then what are we going to teach them? This is going to be a problem, right? So what are some of the findings? Again, lots of data on this if people want to look at the findings. Essentially, kids love playing games to learn science. In situ, in the game, kids can apply and do things that they can't do in the physical world. They could try new things. Suddenly the barriers of the scientific vocabulary do not play a role in the learning process because they can just listen and then they can go further and learn. And so we have a lot of kids that could do many things they couldn't do before. And at the end of the day, it was successful. So then another thing came up like, well, UDL is about designing schools, but we've not really designed a school. I mean, we've designed how we interact and engage with the kids in the school, but what if we design a school? So what if we work with architects and space designers on that process? And the IRN brought them out. And so we engaged. And so we have card decks, one for higher ed and one for K-12, where people can learn what it looks like in a physical space design to design with UDL in mind. And this is actually what it looks like in action. You get teachers and students together and architects and space designers, and they get to figure out what they want their space to look like and why. And so on front of the card, it has an image. On the back of the card, it has research in real person language, mind you, and it marries it to a UDL principle. And then people get to learn about what it might feel like in one of these environments. And then architects take it, like our friends at Multi Studio who helped create the card deck, and they design schools with it. So we're doing research on that as well. And this is just emerging. In fact, we were debating whether to show, I was debating whether to show it or not. But we have some interesting sort of research where we compared a traditional physical space, and right next door to that traditional physical space is a more UDL flexible space. We provided no professional development. We just wanted to see what was going to happen. And it was amazing what happened. Within one semester, we showed students have greater belonging in that space, right? Again, the only difference is the furniture in the space. So then we got into personalized learning. So part of the online Center for Students with Disability, Center for Online Learning and Students with Disabilities, which we had here for a number of years. Sean and I were in the leadership roles there, as well as some of our other colleagues. We studied personalized learning. What is personalized learning? Well, personalized learning is focused on the person, each individual person. Each individual person. It's not really concerned about the group average or the mean score. It's concerned about each individual. And how do we design around that? So we undertook a project to better understand that. Generally, personalized learning has lots of variables associated with it. Continuous monitoring of the learner, what's kind of going on, right? It has, it's very student focused and not as much standards focused. And now the last one, it involves some type of machine learning. Hence, it's leading to AI. So what do we find out? Here's what we found out. Again, we have lots of data on this, and this is a snapshot of the data. We showed that many students in the district, this urban district we were working in, gained 2 years growth in a single year period. That's the top graph. Figure number 2 looks at the ages of the kids and the growth they were making. And the blue lines are kids with IEPs, because some kids in the district had IEPs. Every single one of the kids had an individualized learning plan. Some kids also had IEPs. And so we look at the growth rate there across the two populations. A little odd, isn't it? They're kind of sitting on top of one another. Yeah. So what's next? Here's where we are. Anyone know who this is? His name's right there. So I'm just checking to see if you're paying attention. That's Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Meet in Davos every year. You've probably heard of him, right? So this was from about 2015. And in 2015, what they were talking about at the WEF, what they were talking about was the fourth industrial revolution. And they said, folks, change is coming to us. Change is coming to us in multiple ways. And it's going to be a convergence of multiple things. It's going to be a convergence of science and technology like we've never seen before. And it's going to be transformative in the way it grows. And it's going to impact everything we do. From the way we work, to the way we live our lives, to the way we go to school. And they were predicting all of this thing this stuff was going to happen pretty quickly. And people sat on the sidelines, and those of us who were writing about it and talking about it, no one was like, yeah, they're like, whatever. Right? You technologists are and designers are always thinking about this kind of stuff. It never comes true. Well, then things like this started happening. In fact, this just released last week. I don't know if my sound is on. We'll check it out. So how many people remember the Boston Dynamics dog? The big dog that was terrifying? They decided to decommission the dog. And they decided to focus on humanoids instead. Yeah, that look is the look. I'm getting looks. Like, right? It's probably worse than the dog in some ways. That dog was scary though. I'll tell you that. I've seen the dog in real life. It's bigger than you think it is, and it is scary. So they're focused on humanoids now. That is AI in a humanoid. That's AI in a humanoid. It's going to change the way we are working. It is going to change the way we are living. It is going to change the way we are educating all individuals. Those workforce issues, those shortages we have in teacher education, there's the solution, right? Yeah, it's terrifying to think about that. This is why we have to be at the table in this conversation. This is why we have to be discussing this. This is why we have to be researching this. And this is why we have to be thinking more like a designer. So what is AI? AI, quite simply, there's no universal definition of AI. It's the simulation of human intelligence by a machine. That's all it is. It's a simulation of human intelligence by a machine. Now, AI can do multiple things, including walking robots. Now we add a voice to that thing and we give it more understanding of what's in its surroundings. It can do some crazy things. Most people think of AI, and they've been thinking about it since November. How many people saw AI in November 2022 and it's not left your mind? A few people? Yeah. It's all my students raising their hands. So there's a paper that came out in 2017. And the paper talks about the development of these large language models. And it talks about all we need is attention and the way to design these large language models. Large language models are simply exactly what they say they are. They're large models that are trained on language, human language, and we interact with them in a human way. We interact with them in a human way. So if you use ChatGPT, it's an LLM. It's a large language model. Or if you used OpenAI ChatGPT, it's a large language model. Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, there's any number of them out there. That's a large language model. Just some numbers to point it out. So the human brain, if we look at individual sort of neurons and connections that are working within the human brain at any given time, we have about 86 billion. It's a number, right? We're not ashamed of that. 86 billion, I'll take 86 billion about anything. ChatGPT is working with about 175 billion. And that's 3. That's outdated. That's outdated. Their training data consisted of 500 billion words. And they just released data just over about a week and a half ago that it watched about 1 million hours of YouTube to learn. Liz and I are on a project and we're submitting a grant proposal next week on designing a new AI to help kids. And so today we're talking to folks in computer science and they said, well, what data do we have to train on it? So we're talking about the data and I said, well, can't we just have it watch videos? They're like, that's a great idea. Just we can teach it just the same way we learn. Just watch videos. Large language models and AI are big, but AI is everywhere. You've been using it for a long time. So if you did this morning when you woke up, you used AI. AI is everywhere and it's been around for a long time. In fact, AI has been around since the 50s. Since the 50s, and this is, as a field in computer science, AI has been around since the 50s. It hasn't been this good. We have more compute power than we've ever had before. We have better reinforcement models than we've ever had before. We're understanding the learning process of machines better than we ever have before. In fact, this graphic here is kind of an interesting one. One of the things they train computers on is to play Atari games. Now, I was a huge Atari fan, but as I said earlier, we didn't have the money to buy Atari, so I'd also go to a friend's house. But I loved playing Atari as a kid. I loved playing Atari as a kid. So what they did is to test the AI, they developed, I believe there's 36 of them there. People can confirm that for me. They developed 36 simulations of Atari games. They rebuilt the Atari games and created 36 of them. And then they had, through reinforcement learning, they trained the AIs to play the Atari games. So in 2015, this paper came out and said, we've done this, and all the way up to about hero, you see where it says hero and the asterisk is next? The AI beats the human every single time. The AI beats the human every single time. Now, what is interesting about this paper is the one at the very bottom. When it says Montezuma's Revenge, the AI got a 0% in beating the human. A 0% in beating the human. And if anyone can recall what Montezuma's Revenge is, right? I think his name's Panama Joe or something like that. He has all these rooms he has to go through and explore and do things. Well, what they said is that the problem with the AI that we have and the reinforcement model that we're using is it's continually needing reinforcement to learn. It needs to get the reward. It needs to get the points. It needs to get the attaboy, attagirl, right? But the problem is Montezuma's Revenge didn't have a lot of that built into it. In fact, it had very little of that built into it until the very end. It required a lot of exploration. So they said we need more curious machines in 2015. Guess what? They don't need those anymore because now we have curious machines. Machines that will work without a complete reinforcement contingency. Machines that will work without a complete reinforcement contingency. So now they beat Montezuma's Revenge. What does this all mean? AI is going to transform everything we do. It has tons of potential. It has tons of potential. But I've given a number of these talks over the last couple of years, especially, and a couple times before that. And I always kind of get the same question, especially after November 2022, which is, aren't you terrified that these AIs are going to take over? Don't we just need to get rid of them or not adopt them? It's an interesting question, but we already have. Remember this? The issue isn't necessarily the AIs. Eventually, yes, we have to be concerned about the AIs. Eventually, yes, we have to be concerned about the AIs. And yes, I am concerned about AIs. Especially when we get to general artificial intelligence. General artificial intelligence is when the AI is going to outperform humans. Not in one task like playing Atari games, but in nearly every task, or at least multiple tasks. When we have curious machines that are going to go out and seek knowledge and seek understanding of things, And in fact, what's coming out this year, we're going to see alone, we're going to see a number of agent models come out. And agent models are people that work on your behalf. And they're going to start off doing small things. Like every time the dean emails you, it's going to respond and say, yes, you are so great. And, how can I help you? That sort of thing. And then it's going to respond to him again when he asks you something else. And so, it's going to help with that sort of thing. But the agent models can then combine. They're going to eventually be able to combine into swarms and do lots of things. And if I wasn't running out of time, I could even show them a couple videos that would actually show where one of these sort of models over a lunch period read 200,000 scientific articles, updated the database for the lit review, and updated the figure that goes with it. Now, I don't know the last time I read 200,000 articles over a lunch period. I mean, Dr. Sjogren might have done that. It was probably all for her work, right? So these are things we have to be concerned about. It has the potential to do great things like support accessibility, support more greater personalization, all these great things it has the potential to do. But it has some issues with it. Those of us who have been studying education, AI in education are near weekly on a phone call with a reporter. And every reporter asks the top thing: how do we stop it from cheating? How do we stop it from having kids cheat? And for a while, I was like saying, well, and trying to be academic about it, and it's kind of getting annoying a little bit. If we're only measuring learning on one thing, and that one thing is something that AI can do, we are doing the wrong type of assessment from the very beginning. That's the answer. We need to think of new ways to assess to overcome cheating. However, there's lots of other issues we should be thinking about. Like, what is the role of an AI in delivering instruction? Be it on a screen or in a robot form, are we going to allow that? Do we want that to happen? Should the AI be able to deliver an intervention to a student without any humans even knowing it? And I'm guessing how many people would say no to that? AIs delivering interventions? Should we allow that? I'm getting, well, that's good. Not a lot of hands went up because they're already doing it. AIs are already delivering interventions to students without us even knowing. It's built into their design. It's built into the way they interact. What about other issues we're having? We don't have a very good understanding of fundamental sort of research, the basic research that drives and underpins learning. We do a lot of intervention research, and some people in the room are doing some basic research, but not many people. When the AIs are being developed, the type of information they're looking for is not what is the best intervention you've ever done, because it can figure that out pretty quickly. It's asking, what is the engagement threshold for this kid at this time? And how much engagement is too much over an hour-long period? I don't think we can answer that. That's the type of questions we need to start asking, because those are the type of questions we need to start answering. And we need to do it pretty quickly. Decisions on what, how, why we're going to teach something are critically important. Ethics, personalization, and we have a lack of research and research funding in AI, in education, in the humanities as a whole. What are some bigger issues we have to deal with? Because if that's not enough, we have larger issues. Larger issues. Trust and collaboration with AI systems. I facilitated a panel last November in New York with a brilliant scientist from West Point. And this person's sole research agenda was robotic, humanoid, and human collaboration. I don't know if we have anyone in our school or even our university that's doing robotic human collaboration. But this is what's coming to our classrooms. These are the things we need to start beginning to understand. What does it mean to collaborate with a robot? What does it mean to collaborate with an AI? Do we trust it? What are the trust thresholds associated with that? What are the safety mechanisms that need to be built into an AI in order to go through that process? And then global agreement on ethics, the various unintended consequences. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. We've already talked about the workforce and employment shifts. Defining what it means to be human. Most of us are seeing ourselves as human because we get up every day, we go to work, we interact with others. When we went through COVID, it changed what it meant to be human for many of us. We're going to be going through a major change when it comes to using AI and how it's going to impact our workforce. The reports on impact of workforce right now are ranging from about 18% a year ago by the Pew Foundation up to 70% now by WEF. That it's going to impact from 18 to 70%. There's a huge range there. And it's going to hit white collar, mid-level employees first. Much of this room. Folks, we have to pull ourselves to the table and help make these decisions. We have to do the research that's going to bring forth the future. We have to help innovate. We are the humanists in the equation, and we are missing those humanist sort of perspectives. So as Rick mentioned earlier, the Siddle Center got together with researchers from across the country over the last few months, and we put out a report. So it's about 100 pages. It spans 8 chapters and an introductory chapter that kind of goes into the grounding of what AI is and the history on it, some terms, etc. It's something to take a look at, even if you just read the executive summary. Because what it does is it lays out some of the issues that we're going to be confronting in education and in special education. It's really focused on the inclusion of all students from the very beginning, because that's really what we should be focused on. It's on the Siddle website. You just go to ciddl.org, or if you email me, we could send it to you. So what's it mean for us here in the School of Education and Human Sciences? We need to integrate AI literacy into what we're doing. We need to integrate it into the way we're talking to our students. We need to have our students exploring and testing and playing with AI. We need to develop a deeper understanding of learning and the scientific process of learning and what's associated with it. We need to stop solely focusing on tools and practices. I want to say that again. We need to stop focusing on just tools and practices. Teaching the 10 greatest practices to teach a kid how to read or to do math or to do whatever, that's great. But the world's going to change and they're not going to be prepared for it. We need to start teaching them about what it means to learn and why these things work and why they may be not working in environments. We need to train them more like designers. We need them to think more like designers. We need to discuss AI ethics. We need to collaborate with any entity that will collaborate with us, from schools to school districts, parents, and industry. We want to be at the table. We want to be the humans at the table, having the conversation to understand the way individuals learn. That's our expertise. We need to lean on it. And we need to increase our AI research, and we really need to increase our basic research. NSF has a core solicitation that comes out and it's due every October. Its sole focus is to focus on basic research. I've sat on that panel multiple times, and there are very few submissions on it. Very few. That's the perfect solicitation for us to be looking at. So, I think we need to work and think more like designers. I think we need to think more like designers. That's the whole premise. I could have saved you about an hour and gone to this slide, but you probably wouldn't have any context and you wouldn't know what to think of it. But that's the premise. We need to think more like designers. We need to prepare our future educators to think more like designers. We need to prepare our future researchers to think more like designers. Design is critically important. And the way designers think and the way designers engage with the environment and the way they think about solving human need, that's what we need to be doing. And everything we do, from the worksheet that a teacher develops and puts on Teachers Pay Teachers, to the way that we engage with our colleagues or with our students, all of that is critically important. And it all is design. Everything we do has that intent. And we really need to think about it. So, other than the references, that's all I have for you. So, are there questions? I think one, and we've said this, I've said this multiple times over presentations over the last couple of years. It's the worst it's ever going to get right now. Today is the worst it's ever going to get. So if quality is an issue now, it's only going to get better. That's the first thing you have to remember. Second of all, that's the human portion that we need to get into. That's where we need to start thinking about what is the role of AI in the way that we publish, the way that we engage, because it's not only just writing anymore. There's AI, there's tools coming out and that are actually behind the wall right now that can create multiple minute movies based on what I type into it. And those movies look real. Lisa's seen them. They look real. Sean has seen them. They look real. So the trust and collaboration with AI, that goes back to that trust and collaboration part. There are multiple ways to deal with this. In fact, Young's teaches a class right now that is actually the doc students are going through and trying new things to develop AI or to develop little AI agents and to figure out, do they write better if I do this? Do they write better in this? And what's been kind of found and what we've tried, I've actually tried and a few others have tried, you could train AI to actually understand your writing and write in your style, so it produces a better product. But these are major issues that we need. There's no real answer to it because we definitely have to look at it, into it. We definitely have to think about, is what it putting out a hallucination? Because it will put out false information. Is it putting out truthful information? Is it written in a style that I want it written in? And these are all the different things that we have to contend with. And there are ways we can get into a deeper discussion. You can grab me afterward. But these are the major issues we're going to be faced with. I actually think, and we work in academia. We get paid to publish. That's going to have to change. That's going to have to change. Our impact solely rated on publications is going to change. And whether it changes quickly or whether it changes slowly, it's going to be whether we're around and needed afterwards. So these are good questions. Yeah. Actually, and so the question for people online, I guess I didn't do that earlier. The question for people online is, how do we get in front of this as far as classrooms being connected and understanding these things? So Kate, actually you said something yesterday that sparked interest with me. And so I was going to follow up with you. And then we need to follow up with some funding agencies, because the connected classrooms makes me think of, like, how do we connect classrooms? We have these connected classrooms that are outfitted. We already have some of them throughout the globe. How do we do that and embed, like, basically exploratory classrooms for people to use AI? I've actually had a couple conversations with folks at the U.S. Department of Ed and Office of Special Ed Programs about this very issue. They don't have the money to fund it, but I'm guessing that we could probably find a funding agency that can do this. And this doesn't need to be a domestic thing. It needs to be a global thing. We need to kind of get in front of this. Carnegie Mellon has a few classrooms that are kind of set up kind of in that sort of area, some of their AI researchers. the concern I have with the way they've set up their classrooms is they kind of look like the outdated computer lab, right? Like it's just like screens and kids using screens. And they found some phenomenal things around those screens and the way the kids interact with things. But I want an open learning space. I want something that we can actually use and embed things in. In fact, I think the multi-studio, the group that have been collaborating with around space design, is very interested in the same thing. And so I think there's ways to think about that. And but I think the connected classrooms notion is a good foundation to start thinking about how do we build these connected classrooms and have them in multiple countries and us getting together and all learning together. And that's the way it has to be done. Rick. Yeah, Andy had that.
I just keep back to ERA. So ARA is the don't undress, please. ARA is the largest educational research conference in the world. About 18,000 people there, about 3,500 presentations. I will tell you, a good number of those in the thousands were just garbage. I don't know how many times I hear our faculty saying that students don't write as well as they used to, or our dissertations aren't as strong, yada, yada, yada. Andy and Kate, the issues you brought up have always been with us. These aren't new issues. I mean, Andy asks, how do we know if it's any good? A lot of this crap is out there think about what we all call now fake news. I mean, these are issues we've always had to deal with. What AI has done is it's put it on steroids. So that's the challenge in front of us now. What heretofore nobody, how many people go to 3,500 presentations at AERA? Nobody. Who cares if a lot of the stuff is no good? But now this is forming the basis for everything that we do. Nobody read our journals. Now these are forming the future. So it's forcing us to do things that heretofore some people did, but most people didn't care about.
I think the difference between now and the steroid piece that's a concern is, and we didn't cover a lot of it because we didn't have a lot of time, but the exponential growth of AI. The one thing that you have to know, and again, we didn't get into it, but so OpenAI's model of ChatGPT is doubling in size every 4 to 7 months. It's doubling in size and understanding every 4 to 7 months. So what AI can do, in fact, I didn't throw this slide in. I took it out because I had too many slides. But in 2016, there's an AI called AlphaGo. Has anyone heard about this AI? A couple of people probably. AlphaGo beat the world champion of the game Go in 2016. Now, Go is one of the hardest, if not the hardest game known to humankind. Now, that a robot beat a human on a complicated game, okay. Well, they did that in Atari, they did it in chess. But what it did different here is it trained itself in a 72-hour period by playing itself. And then it beat the humans, the best human in the world. Not just once, but over and over in 2016. But it trained itself. So the issue is, Rick, you're correct. This stuff's been around for a long time. But when Klaus Schwab said in 2015, this fourth industrial revolution is going to be transformative, and he said it's not just that everything's going to converge and we're going to have science and technology and engineering and the humanities kind of coming together and finding new things. But what he said is it's due to the exponential growth and the rapid transformation. And that's what we have to remember. The stuff that we saw in November 2022 is outdated. In fact, the AIs that we've been using, some of the AIs we were using 2 weeks ago are outdated. And that's what we've never seen this before in humankind. We've never seen it before. And there's not a real good solution yet. And part of the reason there's not a good solution is we're just not thinking about it. We don't have enough humans at the table. But yeah, this is so, but we do have lessons learned from this in the past. We have lessons learned, such as we need to think about what are the ethics around these conversations that we need to have. How do we develop inclusion from the very beginning? I mean, we need to think about what are those core values that we stand by, okay? No, and so for people online, I don't know if you heard that or not, but Kate was saying the system's been outdated for a long time, and this is a tremendous time to be alive. I'm trying to encompass it all real quickly, and to really think these things over. Doug Ward online is asking the same thing. We have an education system that encourages us to think like 19th century designers. How do we change the mindset within the system to that resists change? And so Kate, it's kind of the same question, which is, I don't think we're either going to be at the table or on the menu. I mean, that's going to be, that's all there is to it. We're at the table or on the menu. And so we have to choose sides. Like, do you want to be on the menu or do you want to be at the table? I think, we are KU School of Education and Human Sciences is one of the top schools in the entire country. We're one of the top schools in the entire country. We need to not only be at the table, we need to be helping lead the table. And we need to hire the people that are going to do that. We need to bring everyone in the room that's willing to be at the table and have that conversation. We need to start that. And so that's what we need to be doing now. But yeah, this is a great time. I mean, we can look at this in doom and gloom, and there's a lot of it out there if you want to get into it. But this is also a tremendous time to be alive. I'm excited to wake up every day and kind of see what's new. It's amazing. It is truly amazing. What's it? Okay, one more question. I'm getting one more question. They're pulling the cane out. They're cheering for me already down here in the corner. So what does the future classroom look like? I think one of the things we have to get to, and this is kind of the whole premise of UDL from the very beginning, was how do we design something to be flexible, right? How do we design something that has flexibility for all learners in mind at the very beginning? And so UDL provides a foundation for that. Some of the physical spaces that we're looking at and that multi-studios doing work with are thinking that at the core, like what does it mean to be flexible? And so this room is not flexible, mind you, right? I mean, it's terrible. It is terrible, right? There's no doubt about it. So I think we need to think about those flexible spaces like 203 that we have in this building is a bit of a flexible space. It's not fully there yet because it's got its own issues. There's various issues. But then the other thing and some of the things we're missing in like 203, for instance, are like, how do we create hybrid sort of spaces that are a combination of both digital and physical? How do we actually do it in such a way where we have small groups that are maybe working on paper and some small groups that are working on tablets and screens and then interacting with those things all at one time? Actually, one of the things in doing the space design work that we have found, and this is a slip up of ours in the very beginning, when we created the first card decks, one of the first things that came out of it was, well, how do you deal with sound? We overlooked it. We completely overlooked it. It was a mistake of ours. And so now we're dealing with thinking about how do we deal with things like sound in a classroom? If you go to Lawrence High, for instance, they have those learning pockets where kids can go in and learn. I mean, it's that sort of thing that we have to think about and get our administration to start talking about. The other thing that we have found in CITL colleagues sitting around the room here, so we're doing right now, we're providing technical assistance to 10 universities around the country on their use of technology and being more innovative in how they use it. Sean's gone to Hawaii twice, not twice. He's gone to Hawaii once, but Hawaii is one of our universities. Samantha, and then we have Ura and Teddy up there that are helping out with this and as GRAs. One of the things that that we found out in this work is that K-12 environments have received more funding through COVID to do these updates of environments and things. And they've, for the most part, I don't know if they've all spent it wisely, but some of them have gone into physical space design. And so what we found out is that throughout the country, whereas we thought we were putting out interns and student teachers into environments that were outdated, the outdated environments are actually here in most institutions. They're on campus. And so we need the investment here on how we're going to transform learning so that we can prepare teachers to be designers for the future. So I'm going to end it there. Please reach out if you want to get in touch.